Good afternoon. Today's Saturday, December 17th. I haven't been able to put a few of these book reviews out there for a while. I was busy myself trying to do my own audiobook project. I was doing the Federalist Papers. But those are finally done. They're all dropped in a playlist somewhere else on this channel. So now I have time to spend more on things like this, which I got a bunch to show you. I'll do them as quickly or as slowly as it takes. But we'll figure it out as it happens along. But this one, I'm actually very happy to kind of show people about because it was kind of a surprise find. Um, this is a book that came out about a decade or so ago from Kevin Smith, and he is a screenwriter. He is a movie maker. He's a Jersey guy. Um, he falls in the category of people you either love or you hate. But I'm a Jersey guy, and when his movie Clerks, the first one came out, Clerks, it was funny as hell. And you can relate to some of the attitude, you can relate to the language. It just fits so well in the narrative of, being in New Jersey that I loved it. Made me want to see everything else the guy makes, and I've actually been on board ever since. So, and being introduced to this in college through the current day. So I'm very happy to see things by him, to read things that he writes. But without further ado, let me show this to you. This is Silent Bob Speaks. Now, if you're familiar with Kevin Smith, you know exactly who Silent Bob is. But if you're not, Silent Bob is a character that he usually plays in most of his movies. He and his sidekick, Jay, are always hanging out outside of, say, convenience stores or movie houses or maybe even, like a McDonald's type places. And all they're doing is just selling weed all day long. But they get into their own antics at the same time. In fact, they even had a movie based on them, too, about making a movie. But I digress. So, Silent Bob is just the character he has, and like his name says, the guy hardly ever speaks. And if you listen to Kevin Smith talking about himself in a very self deprecating manner, he says, I can't act. And you don't want to really see me on screen either, so he has this character that maybe bobs his head, smokes a lot of cigarettes, or points. And generally, once a movie, he'll have like one nugget of wisdom that comes out there, which helps the other characters and the rest of the movie. So the fact that it's called Silent Bob Speaks gives you that little, wow, he doesn't speak, and now he's speaking. Again, little jokes, doesn't matter. So, anybody familiar with Kevin Smith's work who might also be familiar with some of the Q&A sessions he's had, he actually went to college campuses and did pretty much just told stories to the audience. And the audience would come up and they'd sit in front of a microphone and say, can you tell me about working with so-and-so? Or can you talk to me about what happened behind the scenes of that movie? Or what's your opinion on this? Whatever the question happens to be, he would then have some analogous story to go along with it, and he would just tell it to the audience. I'll tell you what, he's not only very good at writing stories, but he's good at just orating. He just gets it out there and just tells a funny anecdote from a point of view of what he would consider just this loser guy who might even be in the middle of Hollywood sitting among A-list stars, which he has no business even being in the same town, much less the same room. But then he tells this story and it just makes you laugh, which is the whole point of it. Just having a good time. You're not looking for Shakespeare in his books. You're looking to just smile and say, yeah, I understand. Or, oh my God, I never thought of it that way before. So, those lectures that he does, the Q&As, he started out with just an evening with Kevin Smith. And it got very popular. I think he sold some DVDs on it. So then he did a sequel to it. And he kind of made fun of Die Hard 2 in the name, where it was an evening with Kevin Smith. Evening Harder. Clever. All right. It gets great responses. People love it. People want to hear more of his stories. And he comes out with another one. A Threevening with Kevin Smith. And if I'm not mistaken, that one, I think he just answers one question and takes up an hour and a half to 2 hours of time just telling stories all around it. And I think the question was very simple. What was it like working with Bruce Willis? And he just takes it from there. Now, granted, he goes on his tangents. He has some side stories. He just, it's a tapestry he just weaves all together, but it is just generally entertaining. And that's actually what this book ends up being as well. Now, it's not as much of a Q&A, but the fact that he had just finished making, like, Chasing Amy or something like that, and he got a call from Harvey Weinstein, who kind of controlled, the movie industry back then. And he goes, I want you to write a book. And he's like, I got no books in me. What are you talking about? So, bottom line, it ended up being that at the time, he was a columnist for a British magazine called Arena. And he would do, like, maybe a monthly column in there. And it ended up being, maybe it was a weekly column. I forgot exactly what it was off the top of my head. But it was one of those things where they said, why don't you just take all those columns that you've done over the months or year or however long it is and culminate them into a nice compendium and call it a book. Okay. I mean, talk about getting paid twice to write the same thing. And he did just that. I mean, he slaps on some introduction, slaps on, whatever foreword happens in the book, which actually talks about getting the phone call from Harvey saying, hey, listen, I want you to do this. And it just runs from there. And in the course of its running, it's just story after story after story. And some of them are a long tapestry of stories that have to come in one column at a time. So, that's exactly what you're reading right here. Actually, it's interesting because taking all those columns from Arena Magazine and putting it into a book is eventually the same thing that Jordan Peterson did when he put together his 12 Rules for Life. Granted, he had a lot of source knowledge from his Maps of Meaning book, but I believe in his introduction, he even talks about he used to answer questions on Quora, and he would save the conversations somewhere else. And I think he took some of his most popular conversations of answering questions and boom, made it into 12 Rules for Life. So it's not something that's out of this world when it comes to having a new book written. So they took all of Arena Magazine's columns and maybe one or two other things, pop it into this book, and sold it. Well, this specific one someone loved so much, they donated it to the library. And then Joe comes around, and what does he do? He sees it and says, I've got to pick this up. Not to mention, it's for $1. I'll buy 2 at that price and give 1 away. So, and that's actually the same way I picked up, there's another book in this series called How to Archer, about the show Archer, the animated hysterical show on FX. Same thing. Saw it at the used book sale. It was $1. Picked it up. Enjoyed every page of it. Kevin Smith did the same thing for me. So I read Silent Bob Speaks, and I would recommend, hey, find a library, find a friend, buy it yourself at full price. Doesn't make a difference. Read this. It's just so entertaining. Now, what makes it entertaining? Well, here's some of the topics that's in here. So, being in the Hollywood world, he obviously has stories of kind of like hobnobbing with some people or being in their presence and not liking them. Hence, there's a whole section on Reese Witherspoon, and he loathes that woman. And he talks all about Greasy Reese in one of his stories. He talks about, he was actually making Jersey Girl when these columns were written originally. I think Jersey Girl came out in 2004. This book was put together in 2005, but it was put together from old articles. So he was probably in the midst of making it. But in the meantime, he talks about casting and actually sitting down and having a casting meeting with people. And does he like them or not like them? And the studio wants a certain person in there. So he gives you the whole background of what it's like being in industry for casting. He talks about making movies and putting his wife in a part, or maybe putting his daughter in a part. And, casting itself is what happens in Hollywood. What can you say? There's actually one whole section on when he interviewed Tom Cruise. And, spoiler alert, pretty much falls in love with him because turns out Tom Cruise is just a genuine person. And he gives you his story of his interview with him that you can either argue against or agree with. Again, you're the reader. Figure it out for yourself. It's very good. And then while he's making Jersey Girl, he saw the budding romance between Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. And just these people in general He gives you his honest, heart on his sleeve opinion of them separately and together. And let's just say he's a fan. But you get to see how that thing kind of like budded and became what it had become at the time. Once you take a little step back from Hollywood, I guess, you have other stories too of him finding out that a doctor calls him morbidly obese. And he's kind of shocked by that term, and he starts going on certain pills to help him out. But let's just say the pills have a certain after effect coming out the back door that he goes into some detail on. And, while he's known pretty much for having dick and fart jokes, he's got some shit jokes in here too, which, if you like that kind of humor, you're in for a good ride. If you find it appalling, maybe skip over that chapter and read the rest. He even talks a little bit more about being introduced to comics. He's very known for being a comic book guy. In fact, he's written for comic books. He's written for movies about comic books. He even has podcasts about them. And he's got his own comic book store in Red Bank, New Jersey. So he knows comic books. But he had to be introduced to them at one point. He kind of gives you that background story here, that origin story, if you will. And then he culminates everything with probably the biggest story of Stan Lee, or more importantly, going to Comic-Con and being a part of a Stan Lee orgy that you've never heard before. But it's all here in black and white, or in my case, there's yellowed pages. It's kind of an older book. But again, comedy, funny stuff. It's every now and again you need light reading. I mean, you're not going to pick up Silent Bob Speaks from Kevin Smith expecting that you're going to read Ulysses. But nor do you have to read Ulysses in every single book you read. Personally, and you'll actually see some of my picks in my reviews that I just started this year, some you go for intellectual, some you go for camp, some you go just for humor, some you go for thought-provoking, and you kind of go up and down the scale. So, if you're on that edge of the scale or that part of the spectrum, I will say, give Silent Bob Speaks a look-see one day, especially if you know him already. Now, granted, the book came out in 2005, so it's a little dated for now purposes, meaning some of these stories you might have already heard elsewhere since then. But I hadn't, so it was a good thing. Thanks for your time. I'll pop that little thing over here now. Hopefully, if you like this stuff and you want to see more of it, we love working for subscriptions. We love working for hitting that bell and likes and comments and whatever else. It's probably the only thing we get paid. So, have a good day. I'll see you for the next one soon.